Friends, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you to this webinar on optimizing AML screening organized by Fintelekt and the Asian Bankers Association. My name is Shirish Pathak. I believe I've met most of you online, at least at last month's webinar and the ones prior to that. But for those of you participating for the first time in a Fintelekt ABA webinar, by way of introduction, I head Fintelekt Advisory Services, and I'll be the moderator for the session today. At the outset, let me thank the Asian Bankers Association for their ongoing support to make these webinars tremendously popular and well attended. For today's webinar, we have over 950 registrations from more than 35 countries across Asia and rest of the world. As you can imagine, the subject for today's webinar is very important and something that almost every bank would be trying to come to terms with, whether it is name screening or transaction screening. Most banks will already have subscribed to screening list providers, but there are practical aspects to the screening process that really determine whether a bank is really being effective and efficient in this area or not. So today, like in most of our webinars, we will try and provide practical insights from both sides of the table, a risk technology expert, as well as a couple of bankers, so that you can get a well-rounded opinion on this topic. The three presentations today will be followed by a Q&A session, so feel free to post questions using the Q&A button on your screen. The presentations will go on for approximately 1 hour in total, and then we will have around 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. Our three speakers today, in order of appearance, are Douglas Wolfson from LexisNexis Risk Solutions, Dayanand Prasad from Emirates and Bank India, and Vijay Gopaladesikan from Standard Chartered Bank, Singapore. Douglas will make the first presentation, but before he starts, let me say a few words about him. So Douglas is Director of Financial Crime Compliance for LexisNexis Risk Solutions in Asia. He's based in Hong Kong and drives the strategy and product development of the leading risk tools used by the biggest banks in the world that help to mitigate financial crime compliance issues. He has 18 years of financial services, risk management, and international business experience. His experience includes leading risk management departments at the world's most recognizable financial institutions. Douglas, welcome to the webinar, and can we have your presentation now, please?
Thank you very much, Shirish. Delighted to be back again. We were here a little over a month ago to talk about transaction monitoring, and I think when you talk about trying to optimize screening, it's going to be similar in a lot of ways to transaction monitoring, and that I think we have to give up some of our control to computers. We have to obviously set them in the right direction. We have to give the right protocols. However, we as humans can't deliver the same speed and level of repeatability that the computers can. And so I think it's really important that we look at a lot of the same approaches for optimizing AML screening as we do when we're talking about transaction monitoring. What I'm going to be talking about today is focusing on risk versus operational effectiveness, the compliance challenges that come with that, and also get into detail on the false positive problem, because that's really where we end up spending the most amount of time with AML screening. I know it myself from my time as a relationship manager in banking. And it's really the biggest time suck for screening clients is spending that time on customers that you want to do business with, customers that aren't risky. However, they come up with a name match of some kind. And it's really the area that we need to find the most improvements, and quite frankly, that where we as vendors are working the most to try to find improved solutions and improved outcomes for our customers. I'm going to talk a bit about building an effective e-KYC program that involves a lot of straight-through processing. Those of you who have heard me speak before know that it's something I love to talk about, but e-KYC, straight-through processing, it's essential. And then finally, talking about how efficiency and effectiveness are not mutually exclusive. And I think this sort of goes back to the beginning of what I'm going to talk about, which is risk versus operational effectiveness. That really, having straight-through processing, being efficient, doesn't mean that your risk program can't be effective. Apologies, I'm just grabbing my glass of water here. So starting with risk versus operational effectiveness, I think this really starts from the beginning, and it really starts from understanding your risk. This is essential. Where does the risk sit in your business? What geographies are you based in? What products are you dealing with? And who are your customers? Because how money launderers, how financial criminals, how sanction evaders will try to use your platform will be entirely dependent on those three factors. The types of clients that you're already taking on, the geographies that you're based in, and the products that are available to you. We then discuss how you should have a risk-based approach. There are really two major approaches to looking at the risk of a business. The first is a risk-based approach. The second is sort of a checkbox approach. And from our perspective, we never believe that a checkbox approach is appropriate because it's never flexible, and it never allows you to look at the risk in your business. And I think that AML enterprise risk assessment with the risk-based approach allows you to focus on your risk and be flexible with your risk rather than just being there to tick boxes and make sure that you are, ticking a box that may have nothing to do with your actual risk. And then the final bit is that technology assessment, and it's something we talk about regularly with our customers, and it goes back to, what I was talking about is efficiency, is that the technology that you use is essential. I'm going to talk about it a bit on the next slide about how using sort of more people doesn't necessarily solve the problems that you have. And I think the important thing to note is the next set of bullet points, which is when you're doing that technology assessment and when you're looking at your risk-based approach, it's really important that you take the sort of machine learning model, the white box model, which looks at the way that you've assessed risk and then determines whether or not you've actually found the risk that you're looking for. If you have found risk, then that's great. You can fine-tune it a little bit. If you haven't, then you can refine your models to ensure that you're finding more of the risk. Additionally, when you're finding a lot of false positives, you need to refine your models to reduce those false positives. And I think this is one of the places where AML screening and being responsible for building out AML screening has advantages over transaction monitoring. And that's AML screening, you know what you're screening against. Either the person is the same person as the riskier individual, be it the PEP or the sanctions evader who's on an SDN list, or someone who's on an enforcement list. They're either that person or they're not. And so you have a lot of truth data when you're doing AML screening that you don't necessarily have when you're doing transaction monitoring, because transaction monitoring, you don't necessarily find out whether transactions were related to criminal behavior or not. Whereas sanction screening, PEP screening, you know by the end of the process whether that person is, a PEP, is on a sanctions list, is on an enforcement list, or they not. So you have the ability to refine your models to reduce those false positives as you go along much more easily than in transaction monitoring. And finally, and very importantly, you need to ensure that the workflow of the systems is efficient. I think this is obvious. I'm going to talk about it sort of in the next stages, but you really do want systems to speak to each other directly, and you want to make sure that you're reducing manual alerts, manual work, and you want to be clearing as many alerts as possible technologically, so that your human investigators can focus on where the real risk is and not where there are false positives. When we talk about straight-through processing versus manual labor, this is essential. And I think, over the past decade, as banks were hit with fines for not having appropriate sanctions programs, not having appropriate AML screening programs, people were thrown at the problem. Compliance departments grew, more bodies were added. This was a very simple way to do it, especially when you're hiring at a junior level. To go out and hire 100 junior people is easier than doing what it takes to do a technology assessment or risk assessment of the business and getting it right. But as we've talked about, and I did talk about this a month ago when we discussed transaction monitoring, this is not a long-term solution. It hides the inefficiencies in the process. It creates more inefficiencies and slows down approval process. And the reason for this is very simple. If you have an inefficient process, as you grow the business, those inefficiencies don't go away when you add more people. So you can't add an infinite number of new people. Eventually the business gets too large and you need to solve those inefficiencies. You need to stop papering over the cracks and fill the cracks to make sure that you have a good process and you're getting the appropriate risk-based answers back, the solutions back. If you have people there, yes, people can help move cases along, but at the end of the day, if your business continues to grow, which every business wants to do, you can't keep adding people forever and ever and ever. So you need to go in, you need to find the right technology, and you need to stop adding people just for adding people's sake. What we found, and this comes from the LexisNexis Risk Solutions True Cost of Compliance survey, what we found is that adding technology improves productivity and it improves customer acquisition. And these are both things that every single company wants. There isn't a company out there saying, God, I wish my people were less productive. I wish we could acquire less customers. Nobody's saying that. So by using more technology, by creating more straight-through processing, you have the ability to improve your workflow. You have the ability to onboard and screen more customers. And this is the key thing. You have the ability to screen more customers, and you can spend more time investigating the risky cases that pop up. If you have the ability to reduce your false positives systematically, it means that the positives, that the alerts that you do get, you can investigate more heavily and you can put more resources into those investigations. This allows you to be significantly more effective both for the customers that you do want and investigating the customers that you potentially don't want to bring on board because they're criminals. This allows you to spend more time on them. And if you've gone out and hired more people, this allows you to spend more time using those resources. You don't have to get rid of resources. You don't have to get rid of people. You can retrain them to be more effective investigators and spend more time doing the investigation. And that's what's really important. Now, I want to talk a bit about false positives, and I think a lot of you who are in the screening space, who are doing the screening yourself, will understand immediately what we're talking about here. When you do a screening of a portfolio, roughly 75, look, it could be 60, it could be 80, but roughly 75% of your customers will come back with no match on any list. And that's lists of PEP lists, that's sanctions lists, that's enforcements lists, adverse media, all of those lists, you'll come back with no match. And those are customers that you do want. They're not at risk of being a criminal. They don't exhibit, they don't have a name match to any criminals. And so you want to onboard them, you want to do business with them. Roughly 24.9999999%, and here it's represented with 24%, but it's significantly smaller than that or larger than that, is false positives. And these are people who have name matches to either politicians, to people on sanctions lists, to people on enforcements lists. They have matches to those names, and now you have to go and investigate further to see whether or not it is that person on that list, or whether it's somebody who just happens to have the bad luck of sharing the name of somebody on a list. I share the name Douglas Wolfson with a federal judge in the United States, and so when my name is screened, his name comes up. Now his wife is actually a PEP. He is, however, the spouse of a PEP, so he comes up. And so every time that I'm screened, Douglas Wolfson, the judge, Douglas Wolfson, the spouse of a PEP, comes up. Now, this is wasting time of the entity that's trying to screen me, the financial institution or the e-commerce company or whoever it might be, right? This is sort of wasting their time because I'm not that person, I'm not at risk, but now they need to go back and do a secondary check to make sure that I'm not that person, and even if I am, whether or not they want to deal with me. But that's once we're talking about true positives. We're talking about false positives here. They need to now come and collect further information from me to make sure that I'm not him. Now, what's easy here is that we have different middle names. I believe his middle name starts with a K. Mine is Matthew. And so as soon as you input my middle name, it goes away. And so, that helps to solve that problem. However, if they haven't taken my middle name and they haven't taken my birthday, there's extra work that needs to go in there. And that is a waste of everybody's time. And so this is the area that we end up working with our clients the most, is to try to reduce their false positives because, again, as I mentioned earlier, these are people that we want to be doing business with, but they just happen to have the same name as a higher risk individual. The final piece is that true positive, and those are the people that you're trying to capture, right? Those are the risky people that you want to find when you're doing your screening. And a lot of times, certainly not in the case with me and the spouse of the federal judge in the United States, a lot of times there is just enough information that you're nervous that it might be an actual match. And so then you have to go back and you have to do real investigation. Or if it's an entity, you'll have to go and get an enhanced due diligence report to find out whether or not that entity is the same as the risky entity that you found, right? And so this is when we talk about straight-through processing, when we talk about the ability to do more with less, this is where technology is the most important, because you want to be using your human resources to investigate the potential real risk rather than using your human resources to investigate level 1 alerts. So how do we solve this false positive dilemma? We talk about it with our clients. It's data, data, data. That's the first thing. The data that the client gives to you, you should be trying to get as much data as possible, right? You should be trying to get names, middle names, secondary names, birth dates, all kinds of information that you can receive from them, and then compare it to the richest data set possible of reference data sets. And there are plenty of reference data sets out there, PEP lists, sanctions lists, enforcements lists, all of these things. Happy to talk about that offline, but that's the key information. You connect those two, that's what you're comparing. And then you need to look at the analysis of those alerts. When you have a human investigator rejecting an alert as a false positive, there's a reason for that. And so what you need to do is start to program your automatic false positive rules that you're using in your screening tool to reject those alerts automatically. Are they rejecting an alert because the birth date is 5 years different from your potential client's birth date? Okay, well then you program your system to systematically, you program your tool to systematically reject those types of differences in the client data and the reference data. You teach it to reject those alerts automatically. And then if you're using AI and ML, you can automate that process and you can start to look at, allow it to look at the way that you reject alerts and allow it to automatically reject alerts as well and train it to reject alerts. Now, we always talk about white box machine learning. We don't trust black box machine learning at this point. White box is essentially you let it run, you let it reject alerts on its own using rules that you've set as parameters, and then you look back at what it's rejected as a false positive, that it's just simply said this should not be an alert. You go back and say, okay, was this right or was this wrong? If it's within your tolerance of risk that it rejected the right number, then you can go back and refine it a little bit. But if it's wrong, if it's getting the risk completely wrong, then you need to look at those algorithms again and make sure that you're capturing the true positives in rejecting the false positives, which means you should be rejecting alerts that meet false positive requirements, but you shouldn't be closing out true positives as not alerts. You want to make sure that they're not missed. And so this is essential. And this allows you to make sure that your machine learning continues to learn. And this is the important thing. The job is never done. In the same way that your human staff are always refining how they look at something as a false positive, so must your algorithms continue to refine the way that they're looking at false positives. And this is really important because, in our working with our clients, we've seen reductions of 80%, up to 80% of alerts as false positives and rejecting them outright, just using a lot of the same types of rules and parameters that they're rejecting their false positives by a person. They can now do this systematically. It's more efficient and it saves a lot of time. Now, I want to talk a bit about e-KYC as well, and this continues that talk about the straight-through processing and making sure that things make sense. This is one of my absolute favorite slides that I present. If you've seen me present more than once before, there's a decent chance that you've seen this slide. So please bear with me because I absolutely love it. This is most major banks that have operations in different cities, different countries. This is what naturally their systems end up looking like. And it's of no fault of their own, but it's very easy as you go through a merger, as you add on a new business, to just simply add new systems on top of the existing systems that you have. And that after a while, you have so many systems that are reliant on all of the systems around them and information that flows through each of them, that it's difficult to untangle them and difficult to find straight-through processing. What we always tell our clients is that they need to think about, if they had a blank piece of paper, how would they want to be set up, right? e-KYC, the rise of digital banks, the rise of online banking allows us to reimagine the way things could work rather than just piling on the way that things do currently work and trying to fix it. And so when we talk about an effective e-KYC approach, we talk about this sort of straight-through processing where there's a digital KYC at the time of account opening, and this is based on devices, this is based on behaviors, emails, all of the digital information of an individual to make sure that they're not connected to any criminal activity. Then you start your physical checks, ID and passport verification, to make sure that the person is who they say they are, and this includes a visual check on taking a selfie to make sure that they are who they say they are on the identity card, then a full identity verification to make sure the address and other information they're giving you is correct, followed by that screening. And the sanctions adverse media PEP checks, the continued ongoing periodic checks, and we sort of should have a bold line between the 4 on the left and the 2 on the right, because these are continuing ongoing checks, and these are screening checks, these are digital KYC checks. And so when we're talking about the screening, the importance of the steps before it, and the reason why I'm talking about it today, is it allows your screening to be that much stronger. So when we talk about ID and passport verification, what that is an ID reading say a picture on a smartphone of an ID card, both the front and the back, along with a selfie. So you can do a picture check versus the picture in the identity card, but you can also do an optical character reading of the information on the passport or the ID card, so that as you pass that information down your system, this is the physical identity information of your customer. You don't have to worry about human error. You don't have to worry about fat finger mistakes. You can pass that information straight down. And so you're doing those checks, the sanctions screening, the adverse media screening, the PEP screening, all of that screening based on the information that's in the ID card directly, and you don't have to worry about human error, and you don't have to worry about fat finger mistakes, as I mentioned, but on top of that, it's straight through processing. So you're saving time and effort to pass the information flow through, and so things speed up and are significantly more effective. And so that's why we talk about this entire e-KYC approach, because it actually makes your screening, your AML screening, easier and faster, because it's doing a check on the ID or passport to make sure that it's not a fake ID card. It's doing a check of the picture versus the person who's putting the phone with liveliness checks. Picture who's applying on the device at that time. It's doing those checks, so you know you can trust the identity check of that person, which means you can trust the optical character reading. And where we found a lot of value in this is we were working with a customer once, and they weren't using the optical character reading of an ID cards, and it was in Singapore. And so what they were finding was they were getting a lot of false positives on their AML screening because the transliteration of names means that there are a lot of different ways that a name could be transliterated that were similar sounding. However, the characters in Chinese were completely different. And so if they just took the optical character reading of the Chinese characters and they screened for those characters rather than the English transliteration, they would have a lot more success rate and they could reduce their false positives. So having a full effective e-KYC approach is essential. Just some sort of final notes as we begin to wrap this up. Straight through processing is essential. You can be efficient and effective. Less human touch means faster onboarding, less opportunity for human error, and when you have to deal with less basic false positives, happier clients and happier staffs. Both your compliance staff who's doing the screening and your business staff that is seeing their clients onboarded faster, everybody's happy. White box machine learning, artificial intelligence allows for better monitoring. It allows for a reduction in false positives without an increase in false negatives. And I think that this is really the most important part for all of you out there who are considering it. And the reason for this is, again, you're checking against the name, so you have the ability to go back, look at the truth data, look at why your system rejected something as a false positive, and either if it was the correct decision, then you continue to do that. If it was the wrong decision and it should have been a true positive, it became a false negative, you have the ability to go and tweak the algorithm so it doesn't make that decision, doesn't make that mistake anymore. And then the most important thing is your staff can then focus on the real risk, allowing your human staff to use their decision-making capabilities to look at real risk rather than doing the busy work of reducing false positives. So just a couple key takeaways as I pass it back to Shirish. Focus on the risk. Understand your business risks up front and build your processes around that risk and not the other way around. Use your technology to reduce the strain on your team members and allow them to focus on the real risk rather than doing the busy work of first-level false positive reduction. Focus on efficiency. Look at how you can streamline your business. Think about if you had a plain whiteboard or if you had a blank piece of paper, how would you build your business? How would you implement straight-through processing? How would you feed your information from one system to the next so that you don't have to have one person who takes information from one system, turns around to another computer, and types it into that computer? And then finally, focus on technology. Deploy the tools that reduce your false positives, increase your ability to focus on risk, and I apologize, it is very rare that we will have spelling or grammar errors in my presentations. I'm a bit of a stickler of that, but increase your ability to focus on risk and don't focus on passing information from one step to the next in your process. That's a waste of your people's time. Focus on the risk and allow the technology to pass that risk on from one step to the next. And with that, I will pass it back to Shirish. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug, for that detailed presentation. We now have a quick 30-second poll and would appreciate it if all of you in the audience can please answer it. Arpita, could we have the poll displayed, please? So while we wait for the polling to complete, let me take this time to introduce our next speaker, Dayanand Prasad, Principal Officer, KYC and AML Compliance at Emirates NBD Bank, P.J.S.C. India. A little bit about Dayanand. He is a career compliance professional with extensive experience in AML compliance for both banking and stockbroking, including investigation, monitoring, and reporting of manipulations and fraud activities, as I said, in capital markets as well as banking. Dayanand has worked earlier in IDFC First Bank, Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, Kotak Mahindra Bank, and Royal Bank of Scotland. So while we wait for the polling to complete, Arpita, if the polling is complete, can we move to Dayanand's presentation now?
Hi everyone, and thanks Shirish for inviting me for the seminar. So let's start. So to basically understand AML screening, which would look into a customer onboarding process, which would look into an ongoing screening process, transaction screening, and in case of transaction monitoring also, there are certain type of red flags or scenarios which will overall be impacted by my list management or screening process as well. So these are the basically broad points which generally in an overall screening cycle is impacting the screening of the customer or the transactional information of the counterparties as well. So, and why it's important to understand that there is an underlying risk. If it's not adhered properly, we might be dealing with some sanctioned entities, a negative information person, or a person or an entity who is barred from any banking transactions. Might be because of the regulatory issue, might be of the sanction issue, might be if the bank itself has an internal list or a blacklist or a grey list, which they feel that they should not do business with, and ultimately they end up in, if they do not have a proper AML screening process and systems, and which can address to the risk which is emanating out of the screening requirements. Going to the next slide. So effective means whether I am not missing on some relevant information which I should have captured. Efficiency is not that I am not investing a lot of manpower or timing or resources on something which is not very critical or does not carry any risk even. So to ensure that, to understand that, first thing that has to be understood is the data profiling and the quality of data that an organization has. When I say data profiling, it's a very broad term that also includes my list understanding, profiling of my customers, what type of data that I have, whether I have name, date of birth, all the credentials flowing properly into my is quite linked with my AML screening system or screening of the customer data. All these type of information are taken care well or not. Now that is one part of it. Now coming to the validations and threshold analysis. So say for example the thresholds. There are some systems of screening systems which are very basic. They are like they will give the percentage of match rather than they will say this appears to be a match based on the fuzzy logic. Most of them will give you near to the same result, but not exactly always the same. Now, what if the organization has two different screening models? which one for the two different systems, because they are catering to two different type of customers itself. But I should not miss on the risk that is there. So the thresholds have to be understood based on the type of customers, type of product, type of geographies as well. So all those things will definitely bring more effectiveness and efficiency in the system. So the impact of the list that is there. So say there is a list that suddenly will come and has to be implemented. Whether that list has to be implemented across the segment, or it is for a particular type of entities only. Whether, so say for example, I have a list which carries only companies' information. Do I need to screen it against the constitution type of the customer, which is not a company? Answer is no. But whether my system is doing it so, answer is not very clear, because generally it's name to name, individual and non-individuals, or individuals or entity. So what type of efficiency that I need to bring? I'm not talking about the AIs and the MLs, which are also critical these days with machine learning and the artificial intelligence coming in and all those type of things, which do help to obviously enhance the efficiency and effectiveness. But I'm talking from the fundamental things which first has to be set right to make all best of the technologies to give the best of the output. The impact on the analysis of the changes that has to be done and understood before we implement any kind of changes into the system. So say for example, I have a list of directors who have been debarred from doing any list of directors who have some negative information. Now, do I need to screen it against all my financial inclusion type of customers? Okay, that's a call that bank has to understand. What type of segment it is, what type of risk it is. So that is very important. Whether the list that that has been subscribed by the bank is applicable. So say for example, is applicable to my bank is predominantly domestic bank. 90% of the customers are from that domestic geography. So do I need to screen them against the other lists which are not regulatory in nature? Probably that's the call that bank has to take. But to understand that whether the risk is there, obviously the risk is lower because that list matches. So say for example, nothing against a country or so, but say for example, an individual who has been part of a financial inclusion group of that customer, his name is matching to someone who is based in Thailand. And that list has been related to something else, but that's just name match. Does that segment addresses to that person? Answer is no. So the bank has to also do a data profiling and understand the customer demography very well to make the system effective. Otherwise, if I take say 2 million records and screen against all my customer, I will end up in having a huge number of hits. There are low aliases match. Whether those type of list is important for me to screen, answer probably is no, because I just have a name. But again, that's a call that every bank has to understand the risk and take a call. But if just there is a name, I don't have any other attributes, how do I manage? What would a bank do to make that there is no risk? Until unless there is a sure shot information that this is what the risk is. So that has to be very well understood. So sometimes the list itself doesn't have any name. Some regulators or law enforcement agencies give you a mobile number, someone give you just some national ID number. They will ask you to scrub against the customer database and say that you have a customer or not. So at that point of time, it is taken care. What if tomorrow the customer comes and because the logic is built against the name, do I cater to the list which only has attributes other than name? And these are the matches which are 100% true matches. Also, to make the efficiency and effectiveness, robust list management process is very important. Now, the reason is that there are multiple sources of lists and multiple formats of information. It can be through email, it can be through hard copies, it can be through PDF files, it can be through structured information, it can be in XML, it can be in Excel, it can be a third-party structured information. So, to understand all these challenges, there has to be a process around it and a centralized way and near to automated way. I won't say 100% because it will again vary from organization and country to country. But as far as possible, optimum automation of this management process has to be done. It's not just the screening portion because that would help in monitoring and reporting as well. The more the manual process, the higher the risk of errors or misouts. There are certain hits which is probably a system generates the hit, it goes to the first level and then it goes to the level 2 and then final call is taken. Maker, checker, override principle and all those things are there. But invariably, out of experience, it was understood that if this is the type of a hit, it 100% goes to a level 2 or it 100% goes to a business for reference. If that identifier is part of our list management process, or the list, and that identification can be done, can system directly throw alert to the relevant levels rather than creating an inefficient way of going to first level 1, level 2, and then business, and then taking the correspondence back and then deciphering that whether it's a true match or not. The overall understanding of not only the data, validations, impact analysis, list management processes, and as well as, most important, once you have implemented whatever the new screening process is, a very robust and a well thought workflow of getting and disseminating the hits to the relevant or the analyst. If these things are taken care, probably a fair degree of comfort will be there in the eyes of management as well as the organization overall to believe that they are taking care well of the AML screening reports. Now coming to some examples, these are few examples of AML efficiency that probably I have seen in somewhere and was part of it as well. So first of all, the screening and the list management, this was automation of a list management. Is an example, a real life example where the first list was, I tell you the background how it was. Initially when the bank started, the list was taken care by each and every branches or probably some other department, and it will flow somehow to the central team and then it will reach there. The first thing the bank did was to centralize the list management. The moment you centralize it, you know that the focal point is that department, and that department will take care about the list management. So that department receives the list, they do the basic screening, then they will also update the list or they will provide the information about that, and then to the central team where they will probably look into the list whether the list is worthy enough to be uploaded to the overall grey list of the bank. I'm talking just about the internal list, not about the vendor subscribers. So then there are systems and capabilities that OCR capabilities where we are receiving a lot of PDF documents. So they can convert those PDF documents into a readable text, and wherever it was not possible, probably standardization of a format, which at the first level itself carries a lot of information, whether against that list, whether there is an existing customer or not. If there is, so what is the status of that customer? If there was no match found, then that information is also captured, and then centrally it moves to the AML system to the process of list management. Now, this would help not only having a better way of looking into the information, also on an ongoing basis, what is to be done about the list, and it reduced the TAT of uploading the information as well. Earlier it was purely manual and this based approach was there. So, so then there has to be also, while these things, a list is given to a central team, there has to be a workflow around the system, automated manner, so that one or that organization is aware about that necessary sanity checks have been carried out before you push into a system. So all those approvals and understanding was there, and that has led to a list management process of the internal list which the bank was grappling with, and they were able to manage. It might be that some organizations are matured enough to they are already doing it, but there are certain organizations which are upcoming, so they will also need to look into such issues. Now, then there were some examples of false positive hit ratio which was very high. So there were multiple factors. So this has to be an ongoing process. But what was the thing that, so there was a remittance business which was related only to individuals or resident individuals sending money outside India. Do I need to screen them against the type of list that I do it for the trade customers? So it should just merely focus on the individuals. The list should reduce. The type of geographies that product is offering is being offered, those lists should be taken into consideration. So the product, demography, constitution of the customer, whether he's a resident, non-resident, whether he's a foreign national, depending upon that also the list can be tweaked. The risk, because it varies from a foreign national, obviously will have to be screened against a larger list compared to a resident individual who is predominantly just has a domestic transaction. So similarly, so there are attributes like we identified that there were low threshold negative names as well. So by that low weak aliases and something which does not have any other attributes like address and ID. So those type of lists were taken care. So because that was leading to a lot of false positive hits, and 100% of them were converted into a false positive one. So if the conversion ratio of this is 100% is false positive over the period it is analyzed, so obviously that can be taken care of. So though these things can be taken care of by systems as well with machine learning and technologies and around, but certain things has to be done in a manner that one has to understand that the process before going for an operation. Then assignment, that's what I told it, assignment of hits and was tagged to or hits or the risk was tagged to the based on the risk categorization or the type of tagging that was done to the hits or the alert. So if it's related to sanction, it would directly go to level 2. If it is related, so if that hit has a reference which says that if there is a 100% match against this name, straight away refer to business for additional information EDV to be conducted. So in such cases, that has to be taken care. Then there was a process of periodic review of algos, customer data quality vis-a-vis what we were having. So the way I said that initially, there was huge activity that we had to do in case of cleaning up the customer, when the company name was featuring, against which there was the name that was appearing as with an additional information that the regulator had provided us for the SIN number of the company, which is a unique number to each and every company. Now, if I have that number, why it's very easy for me to have it in my database. But if the customer data does not have that, probably then it's a very tedious task. So we ensure that going forward that such type of information is being captured appropriately in the system. So obviously it reduced a lot of false positives. So there are a lot of techniques, and probably out of experience also the things can be worked around. Once a level of manual understanding or manual work towards the automation and a level of degree of processes, MIS has been set through, probably that would then probably a systems like machine learning and also that can pitch in. But there are certain ways that even without that also, I'm not saying that they are not efficient, they are easier, they can be easily implemented and be productive as well. But the point is that if there is a constant, there has to be a solution around it, and first that has to be well understood. So, thank you.
Dayanand, thanks for that presentation. While we wait for the next speaker, let's run another quick poll question. Arpita, can we have the next poll displayed, please? So this poll question says, has your bank or financial institution started implementing artificial intelligence or machine learning-led solutions for AML screening? It would be great if all of you can answer this. It will be very helpful for us to understand trends. While we do that, I realize we are slightly over time, but don't worry, we have all our speakers standing by and we will still take questions after this last presentation is over. Please continue posting your questions using the Q&A button on your screen so that we can take them up later. Our last speaker for today is Vijay Gopaladesikan, Head of Financial Crime Compliance Screening, Product and Risk Management at Standard Chartered Bank, Singapore. Vijay has spent almost 2 decades in the financial services industry and has been based in Singapore since 2015. In his current role at Standard Chartered Bank, he is responsible for all filter configurations, algorithms, rules, advanced module setup, such as stripping detection, decision reapplication, etc., and his data analysis. Before Standard Chartered Bank, Vijay was at ABN AMRO and thereafter at Royal Bank of Scotland. He holds a double master's in business administration and computer applications. If the polling is done now, can we move to Vijay's presentation?
A very good day to everyone. I'm going to talk about the how part of screening, as this will nicely tie in with one of the core topics for today, which is effectiveness versus efficiency. Up to a certain degree, without making any compromise to effectiveness, efficiency could still be achieved, and that should be the primary focus for all the financial institutions. I would like to spend some time focusing on that first, before delving deeper into other areas. First and foremost step would be to define the list of message types that must be considered for screening. There are message types ranging from 100 to 900 series. Not all messages are required for the purposes of screening, but what is critical is to have a documented position as to why you are considering certain message type for screening and why you are ignoring certain message type for screening. Then the next step is screening of domestic transaction. It could be another consideration. Is there even a regulation in the market where you are operating which mandates screening of domestic transactions? Or is the market where we are operating is too risky, that is susceptible to financial crime, which could therefore necessitate domestic screening? Make that determination first. Then the third step would be to define the watch list that we must screen against, depending on the markets that we are present. Which specific lists are to be screened across the group and which specific ones are to be screened locally within that jurisdiction. Fourth step then would be to narrow down the fields within each message type that would contain critical data that is required for the purposes of screening. Rest of the fields can be ignored safely through system rules. For example, there are fields for transaction reference, regulatory reporting, charges, value date, amount, etc. Once you narrow down the fields that are to be in scope for screening, then based on the attributes those fields are expected to carry, target only specific types of watchlist entry and specific attributes those for different types of watchlist entries that are to be screened against. For example, fields 50 and 59, namely the originator and beneficiary of an MT103 and the cow payment MT202 COV. These two fields are not expected to contain vessel names. So vessels from the watchlist type can be ignored through system rules. Similarly, in non-SWIFT transactions, where you have designated fields to hold address, International Maritime Organization number, the IMO number for the vessel, etc. So other than certain specific attributes from the watch list, Remaining ones can be safely suppressed via system rule. So once these basic setups are in place to derive the efficiency, then the next major step is to understand the configurable settings available in the screening tool which can control the fuzzy variations. This is where screening standards defining the risk appetite for a financial institution would help. At the end of the day, it is all about the assessment of risk versus reward, right? More fuzzy the logic is, more variations the screening tool will catch. Risk-based approach plays its role here. What depth of a variation does your screening tool is expected to catch? Financial institutions must hold a very clear documented position with appropriate rationale based on the testing they've done with their own data. I'm sure you all would have heard about the fines from OFAC during recent times, right, for Apple and Amazon, where their screening tool did not catch certain fuzzy variations. This reinforces the fact that the testing requirement is not just one time, which happens prior to the implementation. There should be an ongoing program with all 3 lines of defense periodically testing the system capability to ensure the tool is operating effectively with all the customized configurations and rules that we may have added over a period of time. So the other basic technique that I didn't touch upon is to reduce the noise through regular tuning, through rules and good guys, right? Good guys is synonymous to suppression list, whitelist, reference list, however you call it. Another important aspect that I wanted to touch upon is about screening transactions for sanctions concern, where we must have a capability to detect sanction circumvention real time. What I mean is, if there is a resubmission attempt of a transaction that was rejected for the involvement of a sanctioned party in the past, and now if they make some sort of an amendment or alteration by removing the text that originally led to the transaction being stopped by the filter, how do we detect such attempts, especially real time? There aren't many tools in the market that offer this advanced functionality. But where it is available, where this capability exists, here again, risk versus reward assessment is critical. While there could be several different ways to do the circumvention, the configurations that we define in the system can only focus on certain specific typologies that we've generally observed. It cannot be a catch-all type, right? While so far what I've summarized are some basic approaches to achieve efficiency from screening, there could be other machine learning and artificial intelligence tools that can further enhance the results by optimizing the output that screening tool offers. Reapplying the previous decision, we call it as decision reapplication on similar transactions, is one such capability. It's a machine learning capability that could offer a lot of assistance. Okay. Now, after having spent the last few minutes on transaction screening, let's now look at what we can do for name screening. So unlike transaction screening, in name screening, the data is more structured and the quality of the data can be relied upon, as you know, the data generally is captured post the customer due diligence and all the know your customer checks, right? However, the biggest challenge is the volume that the system must handle for name screening. The obligation for the financial institutions here is to screen against the politically exposed persons list as well, in addition to the sanctions and anti-money laundering list. And depending on the strategy the financial institution adopts, detecting negative news on customers could also form part of the scope for screening. So FIs must very clearly set the standards of who to be screened for what types of risk. When I say who to be screened, I mean the customers, the related parties. So again, when we say related parties, beneficial owners, guarantors, pledgers, authorized signatories, shareholders, etc. And also the employees and the vendors, if we engage vendors, and we need to screen all of them. The standards must also say how periodically the screening must be done against different types of risks. in what periodicity these periodic runs should happen. Again, sanctions list, PEP list, money laundering list, including negative news, right? Invariably for PEPs and negative news, financial institutions generally source the list from one of the data service providers, and typically these lists hold more than a couple of million records at a minimum, each for PEP and adverse media, right? So it is important to first narrow down the scope of PEP and adverse media list based on the financial institution's policy standards. There could be several different categorization of PEP present in the list, and likewise several different categorization of adverse news articles present. Try and align with what your organization or what your policy standards prescribe. Once you've done that, then the system must be set up to do targeted screening. For example, name field in the customer record can be set up to be screened only against name and the alias field in the watch list instead of all the different attributes that are present. And we can also do the screening based on the customer type. That is, when you have individuals in the customer record, screen it only against the individuals in the watch list, and likewise companies to be screened against companies. We can further narrow it down on the name matching by going for gender differences. We could also set up tolerance for the differences in date of birth between customer record and the watch list. When the difference breaches the tolerance, name match could be discarded. But setting up some sort of tolerance is critical. Criteria cannot be set as exact, given that there could be a margin of error on the watch list side. In fact, I wouldn't even call that as an error. In the public source, generally age is what is recorded. So depending on the timing of the year, when the year of birth is calculated, there is always a possibility of the year going off by plus or minus 1 year. So it is important to allow some amount of tolerance here. For PEP and negative news screening, where there are millions of names and the possibility of multiple individuals carrying same or similar sounding names leading to more fuzzy variation matches, we may have to narrow down the results by considering country information as well to decide on a name match. This will reduce the false alert percentage quite significantly. The other option is to discard a name match basis the ID difference, provided same type of ID is present on both the sides. Generally, national ID is used, or in the case of India, PAN number could be used, social security number. All these are unique IDs that can be used for comparisons. Passport number should not be used here because it is not unique and can change post expiry. So in fact, even with national ID, certain countries have changed from their legacy format to new format. And when we use these features, we must be sure of all these nuances and build the logic accordingly. It is not like one size fits all. Then this is again, it is all subject to the capability of the screening tool. If these checks are not possible, then the alternative is either to change the screening tool that can offer all these, or to deploy a machine learning or an artificial intelligence tool on top of the screening system. And more importantly, I forgot to mention that for periodic batch screening, if the screening tool works with the concept of remembering and reapplying the previous decisions, it is very important to carefully determine the set of attributes that system must consider for the alert to reopen on the customer side as well as the watch list side when they undergo any changes. This is another area where things could go wrong. While most of what we have seen so far are deterministic way of resolving the risk event, artificial intelligence tools can resolve them through probabilistic approaches as well, through scoring mechanism in general. But if you have rich data available in your customer record as well as in the watch list, then you don't really need the artificial intelligence tool or its probabilistic approach. But the bitter reality, whether we like it or not, is non-availability of personal identifier information in both the financial institution side as well as the watch list side. On the financial institution side, when it is a related party, there may not be adequate personal identifier information captured. Similarly, on the watch list side, over 50% of the data will not carry date of birth information, or for that matter, any other unique identifier. This is prevalent for secondary PEPs, or relatives or close associates of the primary PEPs, where you don't see their information available in open domains, right, in public domain. And even for some primary PEPs in certain markets where there is data privacy restriction, you won't find their data in public domain. So this is where the probabilistic approach becomes critical. Here, how probable the individual in our books being the same as the one recorded in the watch list is what is assessed by these AI tools. An equally important consideration should be around the risk exposure of dealing with that party. This can all be achieved through scoring, right, based on name matching. Is it a full name match including the middle name? How common the name is from that region? This is all with the name matching capability, right? Then you also will check what sort of role the individual holds. Is that role prone to bribery and corruption risk? How senior the position is, etc. Right? All this could be considered. While all these are approaches that can be considered to reduce the false positives, what is critical to ensure is the quality of the data of the customer records as well as the watch list. It is pivotal that a proper oversight program is set up by the financial institution to check on an ongoing basis the effectiveness of the screening tool, the quality of the customer data, as well as the watch list data. And more importantly, if we use any artificial intelligence or machine learning tool, we must test it independently on an ongoing basis and understand its boundaries. With that, I'm concluding this session. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay, for that presentation. But let's stop the Q&A session now. Let me thank each of the panelists, Douglas, Dayanand, and Vijay, for being here with us today, and especially waiting back for an additional half an hour since we ran over time. So thanks to all three of you for being here. As I said, the presentations will also be available later, both through Fintelekt and at the ABA, the Asian Bankers Association website. So you can look out for that, as well as on our social media channels. Thanks to all the 950 plus people who registered for today's webinar, and a large part of those who actually made it. A big thank you to our partners, Asian Bankers Association, especially Ernest, Amador, and Meg, for working together with us to make this webinar a success. So we look forward to seeing all of you again at the next Fintelekt ABA webinar. With that, let me close today's session. Have a great day ahead, and I look forward to seeing you again at the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.